Section 11 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Lent. "Wish I had somebody to go skating with," said Billy one winter afternoon. "Where's Bob White?" asked Big Sister, looking up from her book. "It's Ash Wednesday, and his folks are Catholics," said the boy named Billy, "and they have after-school services." "What is Ash Wednesday, and what does it mean, anyway?" "Ash Wednesday," said somebody, "is the beginning of Lent, which lasts 40 days and ends with the Saturday before Easter Sunday. It is supposed to commemorate the 40 days fasting Christ did before his crucifixion." "My!" said the boy named Billy, "I never could fast 40 hours, let alone 40 days. How is it supposed to help a person to go without food for so long?" "Fasting," said somebody, "is to teach the lesson of self-restraint and self-control, and to help us endure discomforts without complaining, how to refrain from all unkind thoughts of others, to control our tempers and make us better people generally. It is a very good idea for each one of us to give up something during Lent, something that we like very much indeed, and to give the money that it would have cost to someone who really needs food and comforts." "Do you do that?" asked the boy named Billy. "I try to," said somebody. "Oh, I see," said the boy named Billy. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Palm Sunday. "Tomorrow is Palm Sunday," said the boy named Billy. "Why do some churches give the people palm branches to carry?" On the Sunday preceding the crucifixion, Christ made his triumphal entrance into Jerusalem. All the people came out to meet him, strewing palm branches in his path to do him honor, just as you school children all cheer when the president or some great hero comes to town. "Jerusalem is a warm country and must have many beautiful flowers," said the boy named Billy. "Why didn't they bring flowers instead of stiff, rusty palm branches?" "Because they wished to show him all honor," said somebody, "and the palm was their emblem of joy and peace and victory." His goodness and power were beginning to have their effect on the minds of the people. They were beginning to believe that Jesus was really the Christ whom their forefathers had promised would come and bring them comfort, peace, and general good tidings. The boy named Billy looked puzzled. "So they hailed him on Palm Sunday and crucified him the following Friday?" Somebody nodded. Human praise and opinion is like that. It is always a variable thing full of chance and change, unstable. But Jesus wasn't moved for a moment by the praise and flattery of the people, because he knew what was in store for him in Jerusalem. He knew that Judas Iscariot, one of his own disciples, would betray him to the chief priests and magistrates, who hated him because they were afraid he would convert the people and uncover their own wickedness. Christ Jesus knew that he must suffer violence at the hands of those who hated goodness, so that he might prove beyond shadow of a doubt by his resurrection that love is greater than hate. that love is always victorious because God is love. I think this is the best really so story of all, said Billy. End of section 12. Section 13 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. The Story of the Bible. Billy, called Big Sister one Saturday evening, want to go to the movies? Can't, thank you, sis, called back the boy named Billy. Got to study my Sunday school lesson. After a half hour of deep study, the boy named Billy put the book on the table and said, "That's great stuff, that story of David and Goliath. Who wrote the Bible, please? It was written by someone, was it not?" There were many sacred books written by many different men at many different periods of the world's history, said somebody, which were accepted as the inspired Word of God. At first, these were put out as separate volumes, but after a long time they were gathered together and bound into one volume. The books of the Old Testament were originally written in Hebrew, and those of the New Testament in Greek. Think of the labor of love it must have been to make copies of the Bible. In those days it all had to be done by hand, as printing was not invented until 1,000 years after the New Testament was written. Some undertaking, said the boy named Billy. Were all other books made the same way? Yes, indeed, said somebody. A book was a priceless possession in those days, and there's not much wonder that there were very few scholars. Only priests and physicians had the leisure to become learned, even if they could have obtained the books from which to study. The Bible we have then is a translation, said the boy named Billy. The Bible was translated into various languages, said somebody, but the first English version was translated from the Latin by a priest named John Wycliffe of Lutterworth, England. He believed that the Bible belonged to everybody and should be put into such form that everyone could read it. But instead of being thanked and made much of for the very great service he was doing, he was put out of the church and called a heretic for daring to meddle with the Word of God, which did not stop his work at all because he finished it. After his death, no one did any more about it for 100 years or so, until Johann Gutenberg discovered the art of printing. And when in 1454 the use of movable type was found possible, many copies of the Bible were printed, and everyone could have his own. In 1516, Erasmus, a learned Greek scholar, published the New Testament, which was translated by William Tyndale, who was so persecuted by those who did not want it published that he was obliged to go to Germany to finish his work. Even there he was so hampered that it was not until 1525 that the New Testament was finally printed. Merely as literature, it has made a deeper impression upon the human mind than has any other book, and the extent to which it has helped shape the world's ideas cannot be estimated. No matter how much you know of poetry or prose, you cannot consider yourself well read unless you are thoroughly acquainted with the Bible. It is wonderful that the language has been kept so beautiful after all those translations and copyings, said the boy named Billy. Very Likely it was changed a good bit, said somebody, but its wonderful message of truth has not been changed. I don't know where there's another story like that of David, said Billy, and the one about Joseph's coat has any one of the 6 best sellers beaten a mile. Perhaps you'll like to know, said somebody, that the Bible, year in and year out, is the best seller. I don't wonder, said the boy named Billy. End of section 13. Section 14 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Good Friday. Tomorrow will be Good Friday, said the boy named Billy. That is the day on which Christ Jesus was crucified, wasn't it, somebody? Yes, said somebody, and is why it is remembered by us all in one way or another, by church services or in our thoughts. Of course I know the story, said the boy named Billy, but won't you please tell it over again? Early in the morning, Christ Jesus prayed to God his Father, saying that his mission had been accomplished. You'll find this beautiful prayer in the 17th chapter of St. John's Gospel, Billy boy. Then he went into the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples. Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus, knew the place where he would be and went there with a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. The Pharisees were narrow-minded people who paid excessive regard to empty tradition and dead ceremonies. They observed the form but neglected the spirit of religion. Jesus was arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council of priests and elders. After a hasty trial, they pronounced him guilty of death for blasphemy. They said, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." St. John chapter 19, verse 7. And he was the Son of God, sent by the loving Father to bring understanding to the people so they might obey and love God and know the blessing of trusting him always. Then the council of priests and elders delivered Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate didn't sympathize with the wishes of the people. He said, "I find in him no fault at all." But the people insisted that he give him up to be crucified. So he washed his hands to show them that he took no responsibility in the affair whatsoever. And they took Jesus away, put a crown of thorns on his head, and followed him with taunts and abuse of every kind, as he, bearing his cross, led the way to Golgotha, the place of his execution. There on that never-to-be-forgotten Calvary, Christ Jesus was crucified with a criminal on either side. Jesus' body was taken from the cross and placed in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. 3 days later, on the first day of the week, when some of the women came with spices to embalm the body, they found the tomb empty. An angel who kept watch told them that Christ had risen from the dead. The risen Christ appeared first to Mary Magdalene, the once sinful woman from whom Jesus had cast out 7 devils, and who had become one of the most devoted of his followers, and then to others who were close to him. He spent 40 days on earth after his resurrection, and then from the midst of his disciples he was taken up to heaven. He left no writings and no organized church. but from recollections of his teachings, his followers later put together the record of his ministry as we have it in the New Testament, and with it there slowly took shape also the organized Christian church, which more and more has ruled men's lives. "I wish I had been there," said the boy named Billy. "I could have helped some way, I know." "You can help every day, Billy boy," said somebody, "by being kind to everybody and doing unto others just the thoughtful, loving things you want others to do unto you." End of section 14. Section 15 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. About Easter. "Aren't my hands a sight?" laughed the boy named Billy. "Wish somebody would tell me how to get these colors off." "I should say they are a sight," said somebody. "All the colors of the rainbow and several more besides. What's on them?" "Easter egg dyes," said Billy. "They splashed, but we got some beauties." "Try some salt and vinegar and a nail brush and soap," said somebody. "You'll find some on my wash stand." The boy named Billy scrubbed with right good will. "It's coming off," he said. "Say, somebody, please tell me why Easter doesn't stand still like Christmas and New Year's Day. What makes it come in March one year and likely as not in April the next? A day is a day, isn't it? Then why do we never know when to look for it? Last year we gathered pussy willows, and this year it's cold enough to skate." "It is puzzling until you understand about it," said somebody, as Billy came back with his hands as clean as could be expected. "Let's talk about it. There seems to be no authentic record of the actual date of Christ's death and burial and resurrection. We know that the crucifixion was on Friday and the resurrection was on Sunday, but the date has never been accounted for, although Easter has been celebrated as a church festival since the early days of the Christian Church. To settle all such disputes, it was finally decided by the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. that the celebration of the festival commemorating the resurrection should fall on the first Sunday after March 21st and the full moon. "And why was the festival called Easter?" asked the boy named Billy. "It's a sort of made-over festival," said somebody. "The early Christians called it the Paschal Festival, and it was so called until the Christian religion was introduced among the Saxons, who had a spring festival themselves of which they were very fond, held in honor of their spring goddess Oestra. They seemed inclined to like the new religion, but refused to give up their goddess. So the Christians decided to keep the festival and the name, but to use it in commemoration of the resurrection of Christ." "Who was this lady named Oestra?" asked the boy named Billy. "She must have been pretty important." Oestra, meaning from the east, or Venus, the goddess of beauty, was supposed to have been hatched by doves from an immense egg which descended from heaven and rested on the Euphrates. Out of it came the goddess of spring and of beauty to bring warmth and sunshine into the world, said somebody. "That must be where the idea of the Easter egg comes from," said the boy named Billy. "I was wondering about that. It's interesting. Tell me some more." "There are many beautiful legends concerning Easter," said somebody. One which was quite generally believed in Ireland was that on Easter morning the sun dances, but of course we take that with a grain of salt. Just as we take our Easter eggs, laughed the boy named Billy. Thank you so much, somebody. And now I'll run and get some flowers for Mother. I'm going to get her a beautiful Easter lily. End of section 15.
Section 16 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Emily Keomonivon. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Trailing Arbutus or Mayflower. See what I've got for Mom, said the boy named Billy, bursting into somebody's room one bright morning in the latter part of April. Mayflowers, beauties! Found them away over in the pine woods, just peeping out from under a snowbank. Beauties indeed, agreed somebody. I'm glad you got them so carefully. Most children do not understand the importance of cutting wildflowers instead of tearing them up by the roots. I had to understand it unless I'm a dunce, laughed Billy. You and Mom tell me about it often enough, but why is it called a Mayflower when it always comes in April? Of course I know its real name is trailing arbutus. The Mayflower, said somebody, is spring's first messenger, wherever it will grow, and its appearance is governed by the length of the winter and not by the calendar. I've heard of it in the Rocky Mountains in August. It seems not to be able to live in very warm places, but loves to snuggle its blossom children under the snows of winter, who, when they awake, push aside the blankets and creep out to tell the world that spring has come. And small as it is, went on somebody, the dear little pink flower has made history for itself. It was the first flower to welcome the Pilgrim fathers and mothers to the New World, and as spring, on the bleak coast of Massachusetts, it's a latecomer. It probably appeared in May, and was christened Mayflower by the pioneers who knew no other name for it. Anyway, it was a very welcome to those poor people who had come through so many hardships with its glorious message that the long and cruel winter was over. Was the boat named after the flower, or the other way around? Asked the boy named Billy. I think it must have been that the flower was named after the boat, answered somebody, as the Mayflower was the boat they came over in. A little sailing vessel of 180 tons, yet no other ship's arrival has had such significance as that of this little vessel, which brought the Pilgrim Fathers to America in 1620. The sailing of the Mayflower meant a great deal to the future of mankind, because the Pilgrim Fathers formed a compact that established the government of the people, by the people and for the people. It is well known that they loved the little posy, the first thing that welcomed them with a smile of hopefulness. Why do we not try to cultivate it in our gardens? It starves in gardens, said somebody, very likely because its needs are not studied. Science has found that it has upon its roots a friendly fungus, which nourishes it, and this friend refuses to live in the soil of the ordinary garden. Experiments have been made with soils, and seed from the Mayflower fruit has been planted and has made some progress, so I've heard. I did not know the flower had a fruit, said the boy named Billy. I've only seen a few, said somebody. It is a small fruit, which tastes not unlike a strawberry. Mrs. Ant knows all about it, and is very likely due to her that you find the flower in places where it has never been found before. So, said the boy named Billy, when one tries to provide a new home for Lady Trailing Arbutus, one must not only please her very dainty tastes, but those of her friends. You'll never get very far with flowers or friends, Billy boy, said somebody, unless you study them very carefully and try with all your heart to understand them. Billy grinned. What time do you look for Mayflower fruit? Said he. Along about wild strawberry time, said somebody. End of section 16. Section 17 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Emily Keoghmonivon. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. About pearls. My, said the boy named Billy, I nearly broke my tooth on the bone of this oyster. Isn't it funny? It's as round as a shot and just as hard. Everybody laughed, but somebody said, That isn't a bone, Billy. Old Mr. Oyster has no bones. That's a pearl. Too bad you didn't find it before it was cooked, because then you might have had it set in a pin to wear in your scarf. Now that it has been cooked, it's worthless. I'm in luck anyhow, said Billy, because I didn't break my tooth. But how did a pearl ever get inside an oyster? It makes its home there, said somebody, lives snugly year after year inside Mr. Oyster's shell, and pays no rent at all. Tell me about it, demanded a boy named Billy. I always supposed that pearls grew at the bottom of the sea. So they do, said somebody. About 15 fathoms deep is where the pearl-bearing oyster lives. He is rather particular about his home and selects a place where there is a swift current of water. There he and his family lie in the hard bed of the ocean and wait for the current to bring their food. Sometimes they prefer to attach themselves to an overhanging ledge where they live closely huddled together. The ancient peoples had all sorts of beliefs and ideas about the origin of the pearl. One of the most poetical was that it was made from a drop of dew which the oyster came up to the top of the ocean to get. Another was that pearls were the tears of angels who wept over the sorrows of the world. But what are they really? Asked the boy named Billy, his eyes big with interest. Science has discovered, said somebody, that Mr. Oyster accidentally gets a grain of sand or a small insect inside his shell, which becomes uncomfortable. But as the oyster has no way of opening his door and putting an unwelcome guest outside, it remains. Very likely the unwelcome guest hurts, so Mr. Oyster says, All right then, stay if you want to, but you can't go on hurting me if I know myself. So he builds a wall of the stuff the inside of his shell is made of between himself and the cause of the trouble. After about 4 years, the oyster is likely to be caught by pearl fishers. The pearl found, and the shell used for inlaid work on boxes, knife handles, and other things. The finest pearls are gathered in the East. The most valuable were tens of thousands of dollars coming from the oysters of the Persian Gulf. The largest pearl fishery in America is that of Lower California, from which come the largest and finest black pearls on the market. Carl von Linné, the great Swedish naturalist and botanist, discovered that pearls could be grown by opening the shell of the oyster and slipping a small bead of lead or wax inside the shell, and then putting the oyster back in his bed for 3 or 4 years. Acting upon that idea, the Chinese and Japanese people have established great pearl-raising industries and turn out a large amount of pearls every year. They are very pretty and of good color, but being flat on one side, they cannot be made into necklaces. In several of our states, the freshwater clams are pearl bearers, the Mississippi River industry being the one of the most value. The shells are used for pearl buttons, and the flesh of the mussels are fed to the pigs. Makes you think of that verse in the Bible about casting your pearls before swine, doesn't it? Laughed Billy. End of section 17. Section 18 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Emily Keoghmonivon. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. About Mr. and Mrs. Pelican. Said Pelican quite pleasantly, Come, little fish, and play with me. Said little fishy in a fright, I've heard about your appetite. Read the boy named Billy from Little Sister's Bird Children book. Wise little fishy, wasn't he, youngster? Said he. Why is a pelican anyway? He isn't good to be eaten, and his feathers aren't worth anything, and he doesn't do anything except to eat fish in great quantities. At least that's all I've ever heard about. Long ago, said somebody, when the first expeditions went across the Colorado Desert, which had been until the Colorado River cut it off, a part of the Gulf of California. Someone remarked that if the desert could be watered, it could be made to raise food enough for a nation. There was the Colorado River going to waste, of course, but how to harness it up and make it provide water for the desert, which it had made, was a question which no one could answer. But along in 1904, it was decided to make the attempt to turn a part of the river back into its old bed and make it work. The river wasn't quite ready to go back, and when she did, she meant to go in her own sweet way. But if they wanted her back into that old bed, why, she would go. And, taking things in her own mighty hands, back she did go with a rush. There was that old Salton Sea sink. She would first fill that up, and from there it would be easy to give the people all they wanted on the desert. This was serious. There was a railroad in her track, but what did that matter? People wanted water, and water she would give them. It was a nation's work to stop that runaway river. But at last it was done, and lo and behold, there was that lovely little sea shining like a jewel in the middle of the desert. They eventually made the Colorado give them water enough besides to water the desert, which is now called the Imperial Valley, where rice and fruit and cotton and many other things are raised. That is interesting, said the boy named Billy. But where does Mr. Pelican fit in? Right here, said somebody. For along about this time, very probably, along came Mr. and Mrs. Brown Pelican, looking for a home. And here was a lovely sea with lots of dear little islands in it just big enough for two. But after they had started their nest, they discovered that their private sea had no fish in it. Very probably, Brown Pelican said they would move back to the coast, but that Mrs. Pelican wouldn't listen to him, but said, "Here we have a whole ocean all to ourselves. Let's raise our own fish. We'll go right now and bring back our pockets full of mullets and plant them." So they did, with the result that the Salton Sea is now one of the most important fisheries in the state of California. That is some story, said the boy named Billy. But is it really so one? According to scientists, it is, said somebody. The pelican has long been known to be the best friend of the game warden, which is why he is protected. He is supposed to carry fish to inland streams and ponds which otherwise would not have them. Well, he should advertise, said the boy named Billy. Nobody knows how useful he is. Perhaps he is too modest, said somebody. End of section 18.
Section 19 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Indian Day. Tomorrow is Indian Day, said the boy named Billy, and there isn't going to be any school. We're all going out to see their games and get acquainted. Anybody seen my scout suit? It isn't in my closet. It has gone to the cleaners, said Mother. I know you'd want it tomorrow, and so I sent it out. It will be back this afternoon. Thanks, Mom, said Billy. You always do think of everything. Why are the Indians called Indian? Did they name themselves that the way other people do? No, said somebody. That was the name Columbus gave to the natives when he reached the islands and mainland of our country under the impression that he had arrived at the coast of Asia, which he had set out to find. How did those people ever come to be here? It is supposed, said somebody, that they had crossed from Asia to Alaska and were cut off in some way from returning, and so drifted inland and started colonies which prospered until it spread across the whole continent. Some may have come from China, and there is even a tradition that some were from the lost tribes of Israel, but no one really knows. All we know is that if they were not really natives of this land, that they must have come from somewhere, and that they had degenerated into savages or had never been lifted above them. But take it, all in all, they were pretty good savages until they were aroused by the whites. They had laws of their own and a religion and real languages distinguishing the different tribes. They had kings and principalities, and the Great Spirit was real to them. To the Indian, everything in nature had a real personality and was inhabited by a spirit, either good or bad. They believed in monsters and fairies and witches. The women were the only ones who could declare war, and when prisoners were brought in, they had the right to adopt them into the tribe, or if they did not like them, to send them to death. Sweet and gentle ladies, weren't they? Said the boy named Billy. I'm glad that they are just folks nowadays. I'm glad also, said somebody, and this move to have a day set aside for the purpose of getting better acquainted is a move in the right direction. I wonder who thought of doing that? Asked the boy named Billy. The idea of having a day set apart for the celebration of the deeds of the Red Race belongs to Mr. A. C. Parker, State Archaeologist of New York, who launched it at the National Conference at Denver. But no date being set at that time, it was later taken up at the Lawrence, Kansas Conference, when President Coolidge of the Society of American Indians moved to have May 13th appointed as Indian Day, which was done. The different states, in addition to this, have nearly all set apart days of their own as Indian days, that of Illinois being September 4th. We folks in America do get around to doing our duty in time, if you give us time enough, said the boy named Billy. It was high time in this case, said somebody. Sure was, said Billy. I'm going to get acquainted with some Indian about my own age and get some pointers about how to use that bow and arrow Uncle Ned brought me from out west. End of section 19.
Section 20 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett Wood. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. About hats. In that direction, the cat said, waving his right paw, lives the hatter, and in that direction, waving the other paw around, lives a March hare. Visit either you like, they're both mad. The boy named Billy was reading aloud from Alice in Wonderland, and when he had finished this sentence he looked up, keeping his place with his finger shut in the book, and said, I know what a March hare would be. It would mean any old hare in the month of March, very likely. But what's a hatter? Is it a real animal, or a made-up creature like the unicorn or the dodo bird? Or is it just a man who sells hats, as a grocer does groceries? You've come very close to the real meaning of it, said somebody, for a hatter, as I see it, is one who makes hats. Why, of course, said the boy named Billy. If I'd taken time to think a little about it, I'd have known. When did people begin to wear hats anyway? And what made them do it? They're a great bother. Always blowing off when one is out of doors, and having to be hung up when one is indoors. They're no good except to keep one's head warm, and hair would do that if we gave it a chance. Up to a certain point, Billy, laughed somebody. If hair would only stay on as well as hats do even, I'm sure everybody would agree with you. But hair does not stay put in a good many cases, and hats are far better and much less trouble than it would be to wear wigs. No, I think the hat is a very useful invention. In fact, it is said that the earliest form of hat was a sort of hood, which was tied on over the head to keep the hair from blowing every which way, as it was common for both men and women to wear the hair long and to allow it to hang loosely. When did the kind of hats that we wear begin to be stylish? About the time men began to cut their hair short, I suppose, said somebody. The chimney pot hat, from which all the other shapes grew, is only a little more than 100 years old. What are hats made of? Asked Billy. I don't mean ladies' hats, of course. They are made of everything, but the kind we men wear. Somebody smiled. The kind you men wear are made of various things. The very fine ones are made from beaver fur and coney fur, and Molly Cottontail furnishes material for a great many with her long hair, which is chopped very fine, and some are made entirely of wool. The braid for the straw hats comes almost entirely from Italy, China, and Japan, but is sewed and blocked in this country. Do we make many hats here? Asked Billy. Yes, indeed, said somebody. Making hats was one of our earliest and most profitable industries. In 1675, laws were passed prohibiting the sale of raccoon fur outside the provinces because they were so valuable to the hatters, and it has grown into one of our greatest industries. Well, said the boy named Billy, I now know what a hatter is, but I still do not know what he was mad about. That was just a figure of speech, said somebody, meaning that he was not quite right in his head. Oh, said the boy named Billy, going on with the story. End of section 20.
Section 21 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Mother's Day. I wish somebody would help me with this greeting for Mother's Day, said the boy named Billy. I can't think of anything, and we get marked on it in school, too. Upon whose work do you usually get marks? Asked Big Sister. Why, my own, of course, flashed Billy. But this is different. It will be easy, said somebody, if you will just think about Mother and write what you would like to say to her. Mom's the best thing in the world, said Billy, but these are to be read aloud, and the other fellows would call me Sissy. When President Garfield was inaugurated, said somebody quietly, the very first thing he did after taking the oath of office was to kiss his mother. With everybody looking on? Asked Billy. Yes, with everybody looking on, said somebody. That was his big and splendid way of telling everybody just what he thought of his mother and of thanking her for all the things she had done for him. Being his mother was enough, said the boy named Billy. What more did she do for him? His father died when he was just 3 years old, said somebody, leaving his mother nothing in the world except a stony farm in the wilderness. She had to work the farm with the help of her eldest son, who was 14 years old, and also do all the work of the house. Indeed, there was one summer when she lived on one scanty meal a day so that the children might have enough. This made a great impression on James, who resolved that when he grew up, he would take great care of her. Washington said he owed his success in life to his mother, who gave him his strict sense of honesty and fairness. Napoleon said of his mother, she watched over us with devotion and allowed nothing but what was good and elevating to take root in our understanding. Abraham Lincoln's mother died when Abraham was 10 years old, but she had taught him all she knew of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and also to take pains with everything he did, and to love God and fear no man. Although Lincoln never forgot his own dear mother, it was to his father's second wife that he often said he owed his success, as she almost moved heaven and earth to give him an education. Have we always had Mother's Day? Asked Billy. No, indeed, said somebody. It's quite recent. Miss Anna Jarvis of Philadelphia, who lost her own dear mother in 1906, presented the world with the idea of setting aside a day for the honoring and remembering of all mothers. The world was ready for the idea and gladly took it up. And so we have this beautiful custom, which is yearly growing stronger, of remembering our mothers in some special way, sending a flower or a greeting, and wearing a white carnation to show our love and devotion to our own particular mother. "Well," said the boy named Billy, "Mom's the best thing in the world anyway." "Then say so," said somebody, "right out in meeting." "I will," said Billy. End of section 21, read by Bookbard.
Section 11 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Really So Stories by Elizabeth